You're listening to the Whole Hog Football Podcast, sponsored by Kendall King, bringing you the latest news, position analysis, and more. Here's your hosts, Matt Jones with Andrew Joseph and Scotty Bordelon.
Arkansas coming off its first loss of the season. The Razorbacks a 23-21 loss to Texas A&M on Saturday night in Arlington. Now they have to turn around and play the second-ranked Alabama Crimson Tide this week. It's a 2:30 game on CBS. It'll be at Razorback Stadium on Saturday afternoon. We'll talk some about that game, and we'll look back at the A&M game today with Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph. I'm Matt Jones. For Arkansas on Saturday night, a few yards and a few inches made all the difference in the world. You know, the big play of the game, of course, the fumble in the second quarter where KJ Jefferson fumbles it near the goal line. And A&M uses that play to really turn momentum in the game. But then Arkansas, to its credit, had a chance to come back and win, had a field goal attempt late in the game. A couple of plays that preceded the field goal attempt certainly set up a much harder attempt than it looked like Razorbacks were going to have. And they lose to Texas A&M, Scotty, in a game that I think, you know, they're going to go back and really kick themselves, no pun intended, over all the missed opportunities that they had to beat an A&M team that it sure felt like they outplayed for most of the night.
Yeah, Arkansas comes out on its first series, goes quickly 3 and out, and then on their next two drives, it seemed like, you know, probably what they worked on a lot in practice the previous week. You know, when we were able to go in and catch a few minutes of practice last Monday and Tuesday, you know, Arkansas was going inside Walker Pavilion, and the offense was kind of going over some plays that I think they had a pretty good idea that they were going to be able to run and have success with. And I remember one time Sam Pittman said that should be wide open, and it was a deep ball to either Warren Thompson or Keytron Jackson. And then, you know, Arkansas's first 2 touchdowns go to those 2 guys on big plays, and it just kind of seemed like Arkansas had A&M figured out. Especially the Aggies defense had them pretty pegged in terms of preparation and that kind of thing. Both of the touchdowns that Arkansas scored on were, you know, Arkansas had it schemed up really well, and they put, you know, they had A&M defensive backs compromised both times, and they really liked what they saw there. And then the offense just went through a stretch where I asked Sam Pittman after the game, you know, they had a stretch of drives. I think it was 6 of them. They punted 5 times, and then KJ Jefferson had the fumble inside the 5. And I thought that was obviously everybody who watched the game knows that was a really pivotal moment in the game. Arkansas could have gone up 21-7, but instead they go into halftime leading just 14-13. And Sam said after the game that it just seemed like in the locker room that the team was down by 30. You know, the way that the guys were acting and just kind of their demeanor just wasn't real positive. And I think that that's them understanding that they had a chance to maybe deliver a knockout blow or 2 in that first half, and they just didn't. I just think right now the biggest thing that Arkansas has got to get past is just beating itself with turnovers and fumbles and just kind of some uncharacteristic plays from some guys that, you know, in the past have shown to be, you know, pretty sure-handed with the football, including Ricky Stromberg.
Yeah, that play, the snap that caused Arkansas that have to move back 9 yards was really big. And I thought a play that really hasn't been talked about a whole lot was the third down play before Little's missed field goal. They had the ball in the middle of the field on 3rd down and 9, or I'm sorry, maybe 3rd down and 14. And KJ Jefferson runs it over to the left side, which causes the field goal to have to come off the left hash mark. It's a completely different kick if you're kicking 42 yards down the middle versus a 42-yarder off that left hash.
Yeah, it seems so intentional though, like from KJ, maybe that was designed, but if I'm remembering right, that was he dropped back to pass on that down, if I'm remembering right. Yep. And then he scrambled left, so maybe there was a little bit of improv there from him. That was maybe something that we should have asked about after the game, but obviously you centered that ball between the hashes. I think that's a kick that Cam Little makes 99 out of 100 times.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they were playing for a field goal there on that 3rd down. I think they were trying to get a first down, and they were playing for a touchdown. It just certainly made that field goal a lot more difficult. And then there's been a lot of talk in the last 3 days about the field goal itself and the taller uprights in an NFL stadium. In 2013, I think it was, Justin Tucker of the Ravens kicked a field goal at New England that went over the top of one of the uprights, and it was called good. And so the NFL, in response to that, raised their uprights by 5 feet from 30 to 35, whereas in college it's still a 30-foot field goal. I think the rule states that if a ball goes over the top of the upright, it's still a missed field goal. But it becomes a lot more interesting if it's a 30-foot upright, because then at that point it becomes a judgment call for that official standing down there at the bottom. And wouldn't that have been something Saturday night?
Yeah, I'm not sure what your guys' vantage point from the press box was on that field goal, but from the TV broadcast, I thought it was good mostly the entire way until it hit the goalpost. And then after that miss, they on the TV broadcast, they panned to Cam Little, who is obviously, Sam Pittman mentioned, he was distraught after the game, but they also showed Ricky Stromberg on the sideline, and he was in tears covering his face with the towel. And so you could tell that bad snap really got to him. And I think a lot of guys in that Arkansas locker room kind of took that loss personal, because you had the fumble by KJ, which he was obviously upset about, the bad snap by Ricky, and obviously the missed kick from Cam. So there's, I think, a lot of guys kicking themselves in that Arkansas locker room after that game. And, maybe that could be a good thing coming into this game against Alabama. And I mean, to take up maybe the positives out of that, but obviously that one hurts.
Yeah, Scotty and I were sitting behind where they were kicking the field goal. And, I don't know about you, Scotty, but to me, it looked like it was probably going to sneak inside that upright, and then it just kind of kept drifting more to the right.
Yeah, I thought so too. It didn't even cross my mind that it might, doink off the upright. I thought it might sneak in, or it might slip a little bit to the outside and miss that way. You could definitely see, just from the angle that Cam was kicking from, that the ball was drifting right as soon as it left his foot. It's just super unfortunate for that kid. And just kind of to Andrew's point about Stromberg, like, I know he's obviously kicking himself, and it's really unfortunate for an offensive lineman that, he can play a really good game. And I think people sometimes take for granted, like, how consistent Ricky has been. And, kid makes literally one mistake snapping the ball in the game, and it plays a factor in the next play, in the kick, and where, the ball's positioning on the field, and, where Cam eventually has to come out and kick that field goal. It's pretty unfortunate. I think Ricky's a pretty strong-minded kid, Cam too. I think Sam probably talked long and hard to both of those guys about just how instrumental they are to what Arkansas is trying to do. If there is, I don't even know that it's a concern really, but I think Cam's 0 for 2 on field goals in SEC play. Might have a big opportunity this weekend against Alabama to, maybe put some of those missed kicks behind him. I mean, he's won Arkansas several games in the past, as a freshman. He's a kid that you really trust a lot, and Sam's going to continue to trust him. And I think the fan base and the coaching staff and everybody involved is going to, have a lot of confidence in him moving forward still.
And isn't it interesting how that works out? I mean, it was Stromberg's only bad snap of the game. Might be the only bad snap that he's had all year. I'm not sure. A&M center was putting it on the ground multiple times, where Max Johnson was having to go down and pick up the ball, and nothing negative ever happened to the Aggies. And that one bad snap hurt Arkansas. And not to say that Little would have made a field goal or Arkansas would have scored a touchdown otherwise, but that play sure felt like it stemmed the momentum in that drive. And, talking about killing momentum, there's been a lot of talk, and I think rightfully so, about I've heard it referred to a lot of different ways. I've heard it referred to as trick plays, cute plays, whatever you want to call it, where Arkansas is just moving the ball, it felt like, at will against Texas A&M, and they'd scored 2 touchdowns on the previous drives. They're moving down the field, and then all of a sudden they bring in this Malik Hornsby package, and it just kills a drive there in the middle of the field, maybe on the A&M side of the field. And it feels like we see that a lot, Scotty, with the Razorbacks over the last few years with Briles as their offensive coordinator. These plays, the design plays to get a backup quarterback into the game. I'm thinking like at Mississippi State 2 years ago, they did it with KJ Jefferson. It didn't work. At Auburn later that year in that game where they lost when they probably should have won, I think they did the same thing with Hornsby. We've seen it in other games. We've seen it with double passes. Saw it again the other night with Jaden Hazelwood trying to double pass, and it didn't work. It just feels like they almost outthink themselves a little bit as opposed to just keep going with what is working for them.
Yeah, that was one of my takeaways. I think it was in the keys maybe for the Missouri State game. I was impressed with Arkansas the first 2 weeks, just not overthinking things offensively. Like they would find what worked and they would continue to go to it and go to it. Maybe you throw a wrinkle in there, but it's not a double pass, which I think we understand over the last 3 years that play should probably be pulled out of the playbook and used for the next fire that started
on the double pass. We looked this up last year. At the end of last year, they were 1 for 11 under Briles on double passes. And I'm talking about the plays where they actually were able to throw the pass. They completed 1 of 11. It was against A&M last year with Warren Thompson. But that doesn't take into consideration the plays that have been blown up. They just have not worked at a very high level. Certainly
Right.
not at the level or at the rate where they keep calling these things.
Yeah, and I think you can practice that 100 times. And I told you guys right before we started recording this pod that I was watching the Arkansas Alabama game from last year to just kind of get a feel for, again, just like how that game went and maybe pull some keys for this weekend. And Arkansas was, kind of moving the ball a little bit against Alabama last year, and all of a sudden there's a reverse with Davion Warren, and Traylon Burks hands him the ball after he gets the ball from KJ Jefferson, hands it to Davion, and he fumbles it. I think that it's really hard for those guys who aren't accustomed to handling the football in a game to do that in a game, like kind of in a big moment. Like it could just be, your run of the mill first or second down play, but it's still pretty big to them, and they're not used to doing that. But there's like this insistence on, if we try it enough, it's going to work eventually. Well, all the times that it hasn't worked has hurt you so much that I think at this point that play just needs to find a nice resting place and not come out again. But I thought one of the more interesting sequences was, when Dominic Johnson had 3 straight carries for 27 yards, 9 yards a pop. Why do you go away from that just to get Malik into the game? Maybe Kendall was thinking that, you hit A&M with a little bit of power with Dominique, and then all of a sudden here comes maybe the fastest guy in the building with the ball in his hands. If you can get him in space, maybe something special could happen. But I just don't think the timing was exactly right on that, because that's a drive where you could potentially, hit A&M with a knockout blow and, kill any kind of momentum that they had. And I guess my big thing is just the timing of it, because right at that point with Dominique, you had the ball moving, you were well into A&M territory, I believe, or at least on their side of the field, and you're pushing it. And you got their back against the wall. Like they understand that a touchdown is going to be really detrimental to their spirits and their psyche even. So yeah, it's just kind of frustrating. So I definitely understand the frustration that the fans are feeling with that sequence.
And I don't think we saw Dominic Johnson in the game after that sequence. Did he come back in the fourth quarter?
I think he came in for like a play or two in the fourth quarter, but yeah, he touched the ball 3 straight times, gave you kind of flashbacks to what he did last year, just kind of angry runs over and over again. I mean, his shortest run in that stretch was 7 yards. I think you just got to keep going to him and just keep going with what works.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm like an old high school football coach, the guy that runs the trap every play, where he just keeps saying, run it again, run it again, run it until they stop it. I mean, I just think that's what you do. And I feel like sometimes this play calling can just be giant momentum killers. And the other thing, Andrew, is that it feels like when Hornsby comes in the game, they're tipping their hands, because he's not coming in the game very much on the plays where he doesn't touch the ball. And it's almost like when he comes into the game, all of a sudden the defense is keying on him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Arkansas is put in a weird predicament with Malik Hornsby because he's so electric with the ball in his hands that they waste him on the sidelines if he's not playing. But obviously KJ Jefferson is QB1, and so he's not going to get those reps, but they need to find a way to get him the ball. And I'm not ready to say to totally scrap the Hornsby packages in entirety, just because I do think he can really help the team. But I think Scotty was right about the timing of the trick plays, and certainly when he came in against A&M and they did 3 in a row that went right to him, and obviously neither of them worked, and he was never heard from again. I just think they need to be a bit more creative in the way that they use him, I think. And I think the problem that they have with using him also is that he already entered the transfer portal last year after sitting behind KJ. And so obviously he wants to play, he wants to have the ball in his hands. And I think in a post KJ Jefferson Arkansas world, that quarterback room is wholly unproven. And so you would like to have Malik Hornsby if KJ were to end up leaving. And so I think the only way he stays is if he contributes and gets the ball, which isn't unreasonable, but I think it hasn't worked this far. I mean, he's a couple of chunk plays, but you can see in like the Outback Bowl against Penn State last year, he is capable of being a dynamic player for this offense if they find out the right ways to use him.
Well, they had a great run with him too against Cincinnati in the first game.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Andrew made a good point about Malik going in the portal and staying. And I would imagine, I don't want to say that there were promises made, but I would bet that, you're going into the season knowing who your quarterback is, and you're understanding that that Malik is clearly one of your best athletes. So you're going to try to find a way to get him on the field. I'll say that I'm even after last weekend, like I'm not going to be a prisoner of the moment and say to completely throw out the packages for him, because I mean we saw in the first couple of weeks against some pretty good teams, or at least some decent teams. He contributed to scoring drives, like with I think he had maybe a 13-yard run and an 8-yard run and a 9-yard catch in the first couple of weeks. He can contribute. I think you just got to find. I think it's just all about timing, man. And like I remember it too in the first week against Cincinnati, I believe, and maybe it may have been South Carolina, but one of those two games, he comes out on the field and he lines up at receiver, and they don't throw him the ball for like 4 or 5 snaps, and you're maybe thinking that they're setting something up, and then come to find out, the ball touches his hands not too long later, and he's able to pick up first down yardage for you. So I think there's definitely space for him to or snaps for him that you can get him the ball. I just think Arkansas maybe needs to mix it up a little bit more and make it not so cut and dry that, hey, Malik's on the field and your opposing defensive coordinators like, hey, you got to watch out for this guy when he comes in, because there's a really good chance he's going to get the ball.
And run your normal offense with him on the field. I mean, it just feels like when he's on the field, something's going to happen to where it's going to be a double pass or a reverse or something like that, to where, again, it feels like you can key on him. But hey, all it takes is one big play by him, and then all of a sudden people are clamoring for more Malik Hornsby. It's like you said, we can certainly be prisoners of the moment. And, I think that when he came back, the thought process, and I know this was the thought process in the spring, was that he could potentially be one of their best receivers. And I guess the reason we haven't seen very much of him is because of the progression that we've seen from players like, or the improvement from Jaden Hazelwood, Matt Landers, Warren Thompson, Keytron Jackson. There's just so many more receivers that have, number one, they're receivers first. They're receivers by nature. It's not a position change for them. But guys just who are better receivers than him, who have probably outpaced him in practice. And I figure a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that he's still having to get in his quarterback reps in practice, in addition to playing some receiver. We saw that in some of the preseason practices that we got to watch, Scotty.
Yeah, and even when we're going to campus and watching practice for however long we get, like we only really see Malik in a quarterback capacity, honestly. And it doesn't, to be real honest, it doesn't cross my mind that like, hey, Malik's not getting reps at wide receiver. And I'm just like, I kind of understand that, because like to your point, your top 4 guys are really set in stone, and each of them have made plays. I think Matt Landers might be the only guy in those top 4 receivers that hasn't caught a touchdown pass to this point in the season. And then you throw in a guy like Trey Knox too, like he can be a plus in the passing game. And so there's just, to get Malik on the field, you're gonna have to take somebody off of it. You know what I mean? And it's more than likely going to be a guy who's already proven himself to an extent this year. So it's pretty tough. I wouldn't be surprised if this might be the week that, you know, you see Malik on the field for a few snaps and at receiver, and maybe you see KJ loft him a deep ball. That's one component of the Malik receiving game that we have not seen yet.
The Whole Hog Football Podcast is sponsored by Kendall King Design, Display, Signage, KendallKing.com. That's KendallKing.com.
The Kendall King Group family of companies plays to win, just like our hogs. We know how demanding retail marketing is today. From digital omni-channel creative services, through in-store signing and displays, and finally to social influence, we've got you covered. Our KKG Inc. family of companies, Kendall King, Shopcart Creative, and Soapbox Influence are winning with multiple retailers and brands. We play to win and will be a winning partner for all your retail marketing service needs. Go Hogs!
WholeHogSports.com has the largest, most experienced staff of reporters covering sports in Arkansas. Football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. You'll find it at WholeHogSports.com. The website includes up-to-minute news, daily commentaries, and award-winning photography from the staffs of Hogs Illustrated and the Democrat Gazette. For subscriptions, call 1-800-757-6277. That's 1-800-757-6277. Or visit us online today. WholeHogSports.com.
Want more coverage of your home team? Download the Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Check out the Fan Zone and get up-to-the-minute videos, podcasts, and features on football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. Search for Whole Hog Sports on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire at home. And take it with you on the go by downloading it for your mobile device in your app store. The Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Get it today.
Welcome back to the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
If you're in Fayetteville, come to the Hogs Illustrated Sports Club on Wednesday to hear Ben Cleveland, the former Razorback tight end and the hero of the Razorbacks' last win over Alabama in 2006. He'll speak about his playing career and tell us what he's up to now. That's going to be at noon on Wednesday in Fayetteville at the Hilton Garden Inn off of Weddington Drive. For more information, NWADealPiggy.com. Ben Cleveland at the Hogs Illustrated Sports Club. Arkansas and Alabama at 2:30 on Saturday afternoon. This is going to be the CBS game of the week. First time that CBS has come to Fayetteville for its mid-afternoon Saturday featured game since 2017 when Arkansas played TCU. You talk about a kick hitting the upright. That was my lasting memory from that TCU game was, who was the kicker at that point? Cole Headland. Clanging one off the upright, and it was there where they were doing the construction, and just kind of that hollow sound that, you know, kind of went throughout the stadium. And I guess that hollow sound stayed, you know, within the program for about 3 years. It felt like that was the game where you could really feel like things were unraveling for Brett Bielema and his coaching staff. But 5 years it's been since CBS has been in Fayetteville for the mid-afternoon game. Of course, they've been here for other games that have been part of doubleheaders or the Friday afternoon game against Missouri. But Scotty, when CBS comes to town, there's a certain feel in the air, and I think it probably helps the team that there's this Alabama game that follows a game that was so deflating last week, because you know that you can't sit there and sulk about that when you've really got to get your mind right for who's coming to town on Saturday.
Yeah, I think that was something that struck me after the game last Saturday. You know, the Arkansas brought in KJ Jefferson and Jaden Hazelwood from the offensive side, and Simeon Blair and Bumper Pool on defense, and Sam Pittman came in before them, and like every one of them said that they were already on to Alabama. And I think mentally it's really hard to flush a loss as heartbreaking as that A&M game was. But I think mentally that's where you've got to go to, like, almost immediately. You just kind of have to flush your emotions and put them to the side and move on when you've got, you know, the number 2 team in the country coming to town. But, you know, I mentioned earlier that I watched a little bit of the Alabama-Arkansas game from last year. That was a CBS game. You know, Brad Nessler and Gary Danielson were calling that one. I think that's kind of why, too, part of the reason why I went back and watched that game. Just if you hear those voices and you hear that theme music, it gives you a little bit of extra juice. And during a long week, I mean, it's only Tuesday, but I feel like it's already been a long week, and get you amped up a little bit. And I have no doubt that, Arkansas fans are going to hear that music on Saturday and, get optimistic all over again. It's just kind of part of Saturdays, in this part of the country. It's a pretty big deal. And to be featured, in that prime time slot, it's a pretty big deal. I mean, that's a perfect ground for Arkansas to, kind of prove to everybody that, last week, made a few mistakes and didn't quite come out with a win, but it's another opportunity and another proving ground for Arkansas to kind of make a statement that, it may have lost a game, but it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, when you hear that song right there, it kind of makes the hair stand up on your neck, doesn't it? I mean, it's like, okay, this is when there's a big game about to come on.
Yeah, that's when the best game of the day is, for sure. Well, except for maybe a couple weeks ago when Auburn and Penn State played, but otherwise it's normally a pretty good time slot.
Yeah, or next week when CBS picked up the Auburn-Georgia game. I can't believe that they picked that one up. Andy Staples wrote a great column before the season at The Athletic, and he was talking about, this changeover where CBS is losing the SEC rights after next season, and they're going to pick up the Big Ten. And, they've been affiliated with the SEC for so long that a lot of people think that this song is the SEC song. No, it's not. It's actually the college football on CBS theme. And, like if you go watch a game on CBS Sports Network, you're going to hear it. Or, it was actually, I think it was written for one of the Super Bowls that CBS had in the 1980s, maybe between the 49ers and the Broncos. And, so it eventually found its way over to college football. And then because they've had such a monumental success covering the SEC, during what I think were, golden years for the SEC there in the, the early 2000s, up until really now, it's become so identifiable with the SEC. But where I was going with that is Andy Staples wrote in his column, he said, a note to ESPN and ABC, whenever you get, a monopoly on the SEC rights, you better get a damn good theme song to replace the one that you're losing with CBS.
Yeah, and just think about this. If I could get you to paint a picture, there's an aerial shot from the blimp over above the stadium. The theme song's playing. Shade is covering a little bit of the field. The players are on the field getting ready to start a new drive. That right there will fire me up. And if it doesn't light your fire, then your wood's wet.
I like that one. I've never heard that one before.
There you go. All right, let's talk about Arkansas's defense, because I think Alabama's going to give Arkansas some problems on Saturday. When you can't cover and you can't, and your open field tackling is poor the way that Arkansas has been through the first 4 weeks, and then you play a team like Alabama, it feels like it's going to be one of those games where if Arkansas is going to have a chance to win, Alabama's going to have to put the ball on the ground a number of times, whether that be incomplete passes like we saw A&M have on that deep throw early in the game on Saturday night. It might be a fumble, might be a muffed punt, or a kickoff or something. It just feels like Arkansas is going to have to, number one, win the turnover war, which they haven't been doing the last 2 weeks. And, Alabama's going to have to help them some on Saturday. The one thing that does stand out to me about Alabama is they've still got Bryce Young, obviously, and they're putting up big numbers offensively in most of the games that they play. They didn't at Texas, but in their other games, their margin of victory has been over 50 in all 3 of those. The competition hasn't been that great in some of those games, but I don't know that I see, not to say that some of these receivers couldn't be them in time, but Scotty, I just don't see the Jerry Jeudy, the Devontae Smith, the John Mechie on this Alabama roster right now. That doesn't mean that they can't have receivers who won't beat Arkansas on Saturday, but it's a little bit different feeling going into this Alabama game from a receiver standpoint than what we're usually used to seeing with them. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this all works out Saturday with some of those unproven Alabama receivers versus an Arkansas secondary that's given up so many big plays and could have given up a lot more if not for drop passes.
Yeah, no doubt. I think we throw around the term household name pretty loosely, but I think like a guy like Devontae Smith, John Mechie, Jamison Williams, if you're a college football fan, like even a casual one, and you pay like halfway attention. You halfway pay attention, like you knew those guys' names. And I'm looking at Alabama's receiving numbers this year. Like they've got 6 guys, I think, that have more than 10 receptions, and several guys, I think 4 or 5 with multiple touchdowns. But there's not like that A1 name that I think, just kind of catches your attention just as soon as you turn on an Alabama game. Like Alabama's leading receiver right now is his running back. He's got 17 passes and he's got 3 touchdowns. Trayshawn Holden's their top receiver in terms of yards and touchdowns. But I mean, that's honestly, I knew about Jahmyr Gibbs just because he transferred from Georgia Tech. And I remember Bob wrote a story about all the transfers in and out of the SEC. So I knew him, but Trayshawn Holden's a name that I'd not heard before. Maybe he has a good game this weekend and we find out, he might be next in line at Alabama, but it does feel a whole lot different. Because I was watching the replay from last year, and it's just John Mechie's making a big play. Jamison Williams is making a big play. Jaleel Billingsley, who I think transferred out of the program, he was making big plays too. Those guys are gone. And so it's kind of a new cast of receivers around Bryce Young. Bryce Young's so talented, he can make just about any receiving core, maybe better than they actually are, make them look a lot better. But yeah, it's just another test. I just think, if Arkansas does, play, maybe above its head potential wise in the secondary, you still got to watch out for Bryce Young with his feet, because that kid he's about as mobile as they come at quarterback. He's totally the complete package. Just with his arm, he's got a great arm. I think Texas was able to rattle him a few weeks back. And, I think Arkansas has got the kind of home environment. There'll be enough juice in the stadium that, if Arkansas can get enough positive things going for it defensively, there's little doubt in my mind that kind of an atmosphere would rattle, even a pretty veteran quarterback who's been in and played well in a lot of big games.
And I'm interested to see how Drew Sanders plays on Saturday. Of course, he transferred from Alabama. I just feel like whenever you have these types of games, when you have a real noteworthy player like Sanders is for Arkansas, you guys saw this last week. Mel Kiper put him as the number 1 linebacker available in the NFL draft. I was pretty surprised to see that. We had talked about his draft potential within the last few weeks on one of our podcasts, and I said, I thought that he's probably maybe a 2nd-round pick. If you're the top linebacker, you might be a 1st-rounder. Now, a lot of time between now and the draft to see how that all shakes out. But he's having an All-America type season right now. He's tied for the national lead in sacks, has had at least a half sack in every game that Arkansas has played this year. Has been playing outstanding. And and where I was going with that is, I feel a lot of times whenever you have these noteworthy players who are going to play their former team, like when Ty Story came back here with Western Kentucky a few years ago, they either ball out or they don't play well at all. It's like there's no in between. And so what's it going to be for Drew Sanders on Saturday? Pittman was talking earlier this week, that they're going to have a conversation with him about controlling his emotions. He said he thinks he will. He's a mature guy, an older guy. But how does he play against Alabama? Because again, it feels like there's no in between. He's either going to have a really big game or it's going to be a disappointment, I think, for him and the fans who have been accustomed to seeing him, be the best defensive player on the field through the first 4 weeks.
Yeah, I think Arkansas is going to need him to ball out if they're going to have a chance to pull off the upset. I think their main shot against this Alabama team is with the pass rush that they have, getting to Bryce Young early and often. So I don't want to give an ultimatum, but I think if Arkansas is going to win this game, they're going to have to sack Bryce Young at least 5 times.
Yeah, I think it's Drew's best way to impact any game, I think, is through his pass rush. And, anytime he gets to utilize that swim move that players were talking about, and even back in the spring, he's pretty good at getting home. And I was a little bit surprised last week that, he wasn't able to, outside of the I think he had 1 sack of Max Johnson, got close several other times. I think this is just a week that, if you get that sliver of hope to get to the quarterback, or you have even the slightest chance to get there, you've got to get home and bring down Bryce Young. I just think, I think it's great that Drew is getting some national love. I mean, he is obviously freak of a player. And if you've watched any of Arkansas's player interviews when Drew has been at the interview table, he's really stoic and he doesn't like to talk about himself a lot. And I just think that he's the kind of guy that about the only time you'll see fire from him is on the field. And he's got a definite chance to make a huge impact in this game. And I'm not super worried or concerned whatsoever with him really keeping his emotions in check. I think it's just more so with me. I think he's just got to be a more sound tackler, whether that be in pass coverage and the few chances that he might get in pass coverage. Because Arkansas's opponents have, if you look at some of the PFF numbers, they like to target bumper pool more than Drew, and that could be because Drew is much more often getting after the quarterback. But yeah, he's just got to be sound all around, and this needs to be a week where he's pretty clean in terms of missed tackles.
It's got to be a week, I feel like, where Arkansas's got to have good safety play. You've got to have good over-the-top safety play against Alabama because your corners are going to have trouble. And I'm not talking about just Arkansas's corners. Any corners are going to have trouble, I feel like, covering the type of athletes that Alabama puts at receiver. And, the safety play's been pretty shaky since Jalen Catalon went out. And I feel like that injury we knew it was big at the start of the season, but I feel over the last couple of weeks, we're really seeing just how big it is.
I think what you're going to see differently this week against Alabama versus what we've seen previously from Arkansas's opponents is that Alabama isn't going to miss on those deep shots. Bryce Young isn't going to overthrow his receivers, and his receivers aren't going to drop them. I mean, you saw week 1 against Cincinnati, Ben Bryant overthrew probably 2 or 3 potential touchdowns. Spencer Rattler had a few. Even Missouri State had a couple wide open drops. And then last week against A&M, I think there was also one that could have been taken to the house if it wasn't dropped. But I think you're not going to see that against Alabama. So they're going to have to play pretty much flawlessly.
Yeah, my concern with Arkansas's defense is that to give themselves a chance to be competitive into the fourth quarter, they're going to really need to bring their A game in the secondary. And just with Catalon out and just some of the things that we've seen from several players, in previous weeks, I'm just not sure that, even if they do play well, if it's good enough to keep them competitive in a game against an offense that, can be as explosive as Alabama. I do think it's a huge deal that Arkansas got Miles Slusher back last week. And Slusher, I've mentioned this in the past. I don't think it's fair a lot of times that, we expect players coming back from injury to return to like pre-injury form. I wrote that yesterday about Miles Slusher. He came back and just like completely told me to shut up about that. Like he went out and he had Arkansas's best overall defense grade against Texas A&M. And I think part of that too is just Slusher's understanding of what Arkansas's scheme is. Like he might not be all physically there. Like he may not have even been 100% against A&M, but he knew where to be, knew where to go. And his knowledge of the defense, I think, really, really jumped out. And it put him in position to make a lot of key plays. Like he had a big pass breakup, I think, on a third down play, tackle for loss, maybe on A&M's second series. And I think he teamed up with, I think it was Latavius Brainey for a stop on one of A&M's third down plays in the third quarter. And then Arkansas went and scored on its next drives. I just think his leadership and his knowledge base of the defense, like that is so valuable. And Sam Pittman was just like, we've got to keep that kid healthy. Because I think once you get a guy like Miles Slusher back and you see all that he brings, you don't want to do without that again. So I think it's pretty important for Slusher to stay healthy during this big stretch for Arkansas on their schedule.
To a point that Andrew made about the deep passes for Alabama, I was looking this up yesterday. Bryce Young is 61% completion percentage on his throws 10 yards or farther down the field this year. And if you go to intermediate passes, which are 10 to 19 yards, 74% that he's completing.
He's
an
unreal.
incredibly accurate passer. And of course, you saw even when he struggled against Texas, he put together that great drive that led to the game-winning field goal in the closing seconds. Young trying to become the first 2-time Heisman winner since Archie Griffin in the 1970s. And Sam Pittman mentioned this week, there's so much focus that goes on Bryce Young that you kind of forget that Alabama probably has the best defensive player in college football on its side too. Will Anderson, the linebacker, who he got one of my Heisman votes last year. I'll tell you that. He was in my top 3, and he's a good one. In fact, I think I gave him my Heisman, if I'm remembering right. I'm sitting here thinking of who I voted for last year. I know I didn't put Young first. Young was on my ballot. I think I gave Will Anderson my number 1 Heisman vote last year. They all kind of run together. Scotty, he's just an absolute freak of nature that could take this game over.
Yeah, he's an animal. He can do a lot of the things that Drew Sanders does, but maybe you take that level of play up a notch. I mean, just think about, I remember in the preseason, I was looking at some of Alabama's numbers, their defensive numbers from last season, just trying to figure out what Drew Sanders did last year. And I look at Will Anderson's tackles for loss number, and I thought that there was a typo in that category. There was just, think of a number that you think is absolutely absurd for tackles for loss in a season, and Will Anderson's got that number and some. He's all over the place, and I think they do a really good job of, when Bumper Pool and Drew Sanders line up, you pretty much know where they are. Like Bumper Pool's normally going to be, either he's going to be, if Arkansas is going with a 3-man front, he's going to be between an end and the nose tackle, probably on the left side of the field. You have literally no idea where Will Anderson is going to line up. And just because he might be lined up on the right side, he might loop around and blitz off Arkansas's right tackle this weekend. There's just, Arkansas's better put some kind of a tracking device on him to, just always be aware of where he is, because he's definitely got a ton of game-changing ability.
Last thought before we get out of here, Jimbo Fisher made a comment after the game Saturday night that I think is applicable to Arkansas. And it was something along the lines of, they could have made another play or two against Appalachian State, and there would never have been all this hand-wringing about their football team. They'd be a top 5 team. They'd still be undefeated. He said, hey, I wish that's what the case was. He said, but we wouldn't be a better football team without that experience. And I think about both of these teams, Alabama, they've probably become a lot better team because of the experience they had down in Austin a few weeks ago. And I think Arkansas is going to become a lot better team because of the experience that it had against A&M. It got the scare put into it by Petrino's Missouri State team the week before, but I think you learn a lot more from a loss than you learn from a win. And I just feel like Arkansas is going to be able to learn a lot more from that Texas A&M game than maybe they were able to take away from Missouri State, just because, like I said, when you win, it's hard to get players focus sometimes when you win, because even though things didn't go all right, you still got that W at the end of the game. It's a lot different feeling after a loss. And I'm interested to see over the next few weeks where Arkansas's got these tough games. Alabama is good, obviously. Mississippi State, I think, is better than a lot of people realize. I think they'll challenge Arkansas defensively. Of course, BYU is a tough opponent. I'll be interested to see over the next few weeks how much Arkansas is able to grow and learn and get some perspective from Sam Pittman and some of the players about what they've learned and where they've grown from this Texas A&M game film.
Yeah, I think what we've learned so far through Sam's tenure is that win or lose, Sam and his staff are really good about, getting their guys to move on to the next game. I remember when Arkansas snapped its long losing streak during Sam's first year, there was a celebration that night. And then I don't think they really even talked about it that Monday or Tuesday, because it was just kind of on to the next game. I know they were, again, preparing for another SEC game, that next week after the Mississippi State win. But it's just, Sam and his staff are really good about instilling belief in their players. And I just think that the days of Arkansas feeling like it takes the field, outclassed or, without belief that they can at least hang with somebody, I think those days are long gone. And just another point on this weekend, you look at Alabama's schedule outside of that Texas game, it's like a bunch of 50-point wins. And so it's been, Saturday will be 3 weeks since I feel like Alabama's faced any kind of game pressure whatsoever. And they faced a pretty rowdy, hostile road environment. And so I'm going to be curious to see how Alabama responds to that after, a couple of games the last 2 weeks against Louisiana Monroe. 63-7. Vanderbilt last week, 55-3. They haven't really been tested in the last 2 weeks. And so I'm curious about their game readiness when, adversity may hit them. That could be, you could see potentially Alabama. I don't want to say fold in that pressure, but you may face some adversity early.
Yeah, their players haven't really had to play a lot of 4-quarter games other than Texas. Their games have been over by halftime. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the second half. Another key to this weekend is the fact that Arkansas is getting outscored by a lot in the third quarter right now. They've got to get to be a better team after halftime. And Sam Pittman said earlier this week that there are going to be some things they do in practice this week to address that. They will be back later this week to talk more about Arkansas, Alabama. We could dive into this game for probably 3 or 4 hours and preview the Razorbacks and the Crimson Tide. Tom Murphy will join us later this week, and we'll also give our weekend predictions. That podcast will publish Friday on our Whole Hog Sports channels. For Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph, I'm Matt Jones. We appreciate you joining us. Go to wholehogsports.com throughout the week for all of our coverage leading up to Arkansas and Alabama, and join us again later this week for another edition of the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
The proceeding has been a production of wholehogsports.com. Look for our latest podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast store. And visit us anytime at wholehogsports.com for the latest news and commentary.